I can confirm, Chairman, it's now recording. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome to the latest instalment of Economic Regeneration and Leisure Committee. As everyone realises by now, we're doing this by Skype, and it's being played live at the moment on our YouTube channel. The meeting's obviously going to be recorded for future playback, but I'd just like to check if anyone present wishes to record the meeting separately. Speak now or forever hold your silence, as I say. No? Okay, thank you for that. Just to remind people, obviously, as I think we all know by now, instant messaging will be available for the public to see, and we really should be using it only for issues associated with tonight's meeting. So at this point, I'll ask Olivia if she could go through the roll call, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Good evening, members. Councillor Cox.
Present.
Councillor Fort has not managed to join the call yet, at which point we should have Councillor Perry substituting.
I'm here, present. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor and Mrs. Gooch.
Present.
Councillor Harper.
Present.
And Councillor Hinder.
Present.
Councillor Lewins. Councillor Lewins is present and has indicated in the IM that she is. Councillor Pearl.
Present.
Councillor Round.
Present.
Apologies have been received from Councillor Webb, in which case I should have Councillor Joy as substitute.
Present.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman. That concludes the attendance.
Right, thank you. So item one's actually no. Next is the officers. If you'd like to read out, Olivia, a list of the officers we've got tonight.
Yes, so with us this evening we have Alison Broom, the Chief Executive, Mark Green, Director of Finance and Business Improvement for item 16, Angela Woodhouse, Head of Policy, Communications and Governance, Anna Collier, Policy and Information Manager for item 15, John Littlemore, Head of Housing and Community Services, John Foster, Head of Regeneration and Economic Development for items 17 and 18, Mike Evans as Leisure Manager, and Ryan O'Connell, Democratic and Electoral Services Manager for item 14. And myself, Olivia Parfitt, as clerk.
Okay, thank you very much. And if we go to the agenda papers, item 1 is apologies for absence. We obviously have apologies from Richard Webb and Jill Fault for lateness. So then that takes us on to item 2, substitute members. That's just formally if you could both notify us.
Councillor Joy for Councillor Webb.
Thank you, Denise. And John?
Councillor Perry for Councillor Ford.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Agenda item 3 is urgent items. I believe a briefing note has been distributed to committee members in respect of item 14, reportedly licensing committee draft busking guidelines. So I intend to take that with that agenda item this evening. If we move on then. So item number 4 is notification of visiting members. I think we have a number of visiting members tonight. If you'd just like to indicate and the items you wish to speak on.
Councillor Grigg, items 17 and 18 reserve my right, please.
Okay, thank you, Sue. Next. We've got is David
Nagy, all items, thank you.
Okay. And is Gordon Newton, are you there? Councillor Newton? No? Okay. That takes us then on to item 5, which is disclosures by members and officers. Now, the committee clerk will ask if there are any disclosures and if anybody can indicate yes or no. So over to you, Olivia.
Chairman, for disclosures by members and officers, if we can just take that if there aren't any disclosures, then there won't be any, and it's for disclosures of lobbying that I'll do a roll call if that's okay.
Oh, okay, sorry, yeah, running ahead of myself. I'll take silence to be nobody has any disclosures, which takes us on to item 6. So, Olivia, if you could go through the roll call again for lobbying.
Thank you, Chairman. Councillor Cox. Councillor Cox, you're on mute.
14, 17 and 18, thank you.
Councillor Mrs Gooch.
Yes, I've been lobbied on item 17.
Apologies, Chairman, but I've just noticed that Councillor Fort has entered the call.
Okay.
Councillor Fort, have you been lobbied on any items?
Yes, 17.
Thank you. Councillor Harper.
17.
Councillor Hinder.
17.
Councillor Lewins. None from Councillor Lewins in the IM. And Councillor Powell.
17 and 18.
Councillor Round. Councillor Round, you're on mute.
15, 17 and 18.
Thank you. And apologies, Councillor Joy.
Item 17, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay. That takes us on to agenda item number 7, which is to consider whether any item should be taken in part 2 in the private session because of a disclosure of exempt information. Well, we have the part 2 papers on item 17 relating to the Hazlitt Theatre. The exempt information needs to be considered under part 2. So we will be moving to part 2 later on the agenda. Takes us on to agenda item number 8, which is minutes of our meeting held on the 15th of December 2020. So if we go through page by page, and if anyone has a point of order, a correction, please raise it as we go through. So page 1, page 2, page 3, and page 4. No, can I take those as a correct record of the meeting then, please? Is that agreed?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Thank you. Takes us on to agenda item number 9, which is presentation of petitions. And as has been the trend recently, there are no petitions for the meeting tonight, which then takes us on to item number 10, question and answer session for members of the public. We do have a question this evening from Miss Rebecca Roberts. Miss Roberts, if you're on the Skype meeting, if you'd like to read your question out.
Chairman, I don't actually believe that member of the public is on the call at the moment.
So what do? Do we read some? Do you read the question out on her behalf, or?
I'm just having a look at the Constitution, if I can have a moment, please.
Okay, yes.
So, Chairman, I can ask the question on their behalf also, and you can then decide that a written reply can be given or deal with it in the questioner's absence.
I can deal with it, I think.
Would you like me to read out the question?
No, yeah.
So the question from Rebecca Roberts is, whilst I'm really pleased that I understand a decision has been made to save the Hazlitt, I'd be interested to know why the U-turn.
Okay, well, thank you for that question. Thank you for reading it on Rebecca's behalf. Obviously, as everybody on the committee present this evening remembers, we had a report in November last year looking at future arrangements for the Hazlitt Theatre. And we all remember that the situation was clearly uncertain in terms of COVID. And at that point, it was resolved that the committee, whilst wishing to keep Hazlitt open in some form, would go ahead with entering into negotiations with Parkwood Leisure over the future of their contract. Now, obviously, that contract was then called into Policy and Resources, and we're now reconsidering it this evening. Now, I mean, obviously, I won't repeat what I'm saying now later on, but clearly the world, in a sense, has moved considerably from where we were. Where we were in November. In November, there were no vaccines approved at that stage by the government, and there was no vaccine program. We're clearly now, I think it was over 6.5 million or something up to today have been vaccinated, and that process seems to be going forward, luckily according largely to the timetables. So if you like, the world has changed, and whilst in November it was unclear how long the health crisis would be going on for, now things look considerably different. So it is completely appropriate to reconsider the decision, and hopefully later on this evening we will be moving to retain our contract with Parkwood and to move towards getting the Arts Centre open as early as possible. I've also been asked just to reiterate that the annual subsidy, whilst it costs the council £244,000 a year, does actually generate through additional money into our economy. When the Arts Centre is fully open, anything up to 10 times that amount in terms of money being spent locally and in Earl Street, obviously in the restaurants and bars and so on. So that has and our subsidy does provide good value for money to the residents of Maidstone, let alone a vibrant arts centre. So that's my answer on that, which takes us on to agenda item 11, questions from members to the chair. I'm not aware of any questions being asked this evening, at which point we then go on to agenda item number 12, the committee work programme on page 5. So, John, over to you.
Thank you, Chair, and good evening, members. Not much to add other than since we last met, we've obviously gone into another lockdown. We have another series of grants to give out to businesses, including a significant amount of discretionary funding, which the team are now fully engaged in. That does mean, however, that we once again will have to put back the economic development strategy coming to Earl Committee, probably until April. I'm not aware of any conflict with the local plan timetable, and as I've said previously, there are no spatial policies in the economic development strategy first draft, so there shouldn't be any issues there. But that's all I have to add, Chairman.
Thank you. There's another item which we need to update, wasn't there? On the programme, you look at, we've got capital expenditure proposals for the museum. We're likely to be bringing a outline report, hopefully to the March meeting, but if not March, is April. That's our current plans, and it'll be obviously raised later on the agenda under the capital programme. So with those couple of things to note, can we agree to note that report?
Can I say something, please, Paul?
Yeah, sorry, Martin. Yes, go ahead.
Just a small thing. I know it's very difficult with timings, whether there's an election or not in May. The only certain thing, there's uncertainty at the moment, but I just wanted to make sure that we do pencil in, if we don't confirm, a couple of items I have previously mentioned to John, and that is at some point in time this committee is presented with an update on the Innovation Centre, since already we are very proud to announce, and should be saying very proudly, that we have a tenant in there already. And added to which an update on the Innovation Centre, but also some preparedness for some of the work Paul was doing in terms of sports provision throughout the borough.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Roundy. Happy to do that. And as you know, great progress is being made at the Innovation Centre, and I can ask the officer to come and give that briefing. And also, I know Mike Evans can also update you with regard to where we are with making Maidstone more active in April too.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Martin. Which nicely reminds me, we may have I'm currently doing some work with the officers in terms of a Maidstone Arts and Cultural Forum, and we're not yet clear whether we need to bring that to committee or not. Obviously, if we do, clearly it will come to committee, but I'm, as I say, in discussions with the officers, and we'll be in discussion with the Vice Chair of Martin on that. But that may be a future item. So if we can note that report and then move on to agenda item 13, reports of outside bodies. There are no reports this evening. Takes us on to the first of our agenda papers this evening. So number 14 is report of the licensing committee held on the 14th of January 2021 on the draft busking guidelines. So it's a reference to us. So I think Ryan, you're introducing the report.
Thank you, Chairman. Good evening, members. I hope you're all safe and well. I'm presenting this item as a matter of process, as it is a recommendation put forward by the Licensing Committee to this committee tonight. The Licensing Committee are seeking support for the busking guidelines that will be going to Communities, Housing and Environment Committee. And we're particularly looking for this committee to focus on the matter of using the bandstand in Brenchley Gardens in relation to busking. John Littlemore is available as a relevant head of service for advice on the busking guidelines if that is needed, and a briefing note has been circulated to members regarding Brenchley Gardens and the bandstand. And I also note that the Licensing Committee Chairman is substituting on the committee tonight as well. Thank you.
Chairman, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. Before I open this to questions, I just wondered if either Denise, as the chair of licensing, or John Littlemore wished to add anything.
I'd like to speak, but I'm happy to go after John, whatever he would prefer.
John, if you would
Thank you, Chair. Yes, thank you, Chair. Just very briefly to say, during the discussion about the guidelines, which have been out to public consultation, a member of the licensing committee did suggest that Brenchley Gardens might provide a suitable area for buskers to perform from. Obviously, we're not the highways authority, so the debate about whether we could designate pitches on Wig Street, etc., wasn't available to us, but the option of the bandstand at Brenchley Gardens was. But clearly, licensing committee wasn't the correct committee to make that decision, hence the referral to your own committee. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Denise, would you like to come in now as chair of the committee?
Yes. Mr. Littlemore has said what I was going to say in the respect, but just to add that we did have a very long discussion. I think a lot of us on the licensing committee were aware that it could be a problem to use the bandstand because of booking, and buskers probably prefer to be where there's footfall. But I do have a question, and I am asking the committee to support these guidelines so it can go to communities and housing. Could you tell me where the guidance or the briefing note did that come? Where did it come from? Who wrote the briefing note that was sent out?
Would you like me to answer that, Chairman?
Yes, sorry.
Yeah, I mean, John Foster may be able to add to it, but it came from economic development.
Did you want to ask a question on the briefing? Sorry, John.
No, I had nothing else to add. It just didn't say where it had come from. I mean, I wasn't saying there was anything I didn't agree with. I just had that question as to where it had come from. That was all. Thank you.
Okay. I've got down Councillor Martin Cox and Councillor Bob Hinder. And actually, no, Councillor Nagy, as a visiting member, has asked if he could speak. So I'll take Councillor Nagy first. So David, over to you.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, it came up as because it does seem to be quite sensible to let buskers go in there. But then the other thing was, is it that sensible on who could be attracted in there? And of course, we discussed it. And of course, the licensing committee haven't got that authority, as the chairman was saying. And some people thought it was a good idea, some didn't. So it's one of those things. But obviously, being on council land, the council have to give permission, as in all highway, all the land owned by the council, they have to give permission, and that was the thing. Was it too much hassle to try and book something like that, or was it a good idea? And of course, the licensing committee couldn't do that, and that's why it's going to all these other committees. But it seems to be a good idea, but is it if you think about it? And that was the thing, and then the supervision of it as well, if someone was in there. Thank you very much.
Thank you, David. So I've now got Councillor Martin Cox and Bob Hindle and Faye Gooch.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Thank you very much, Chairman. I don't know who to really aim the question to, but it's twofold, really. One, were the bid consulted, or are they part of the consultation and feedback that we can see here the results of? And two, I would have said that Brenchley Gardens is more of a park, and therefore, if we were to put buskers in there, by the time they've perhaps got a crowd by putting it on Facebook or something like that, I think there's probably a danger of it becoming an actual event that might need more than just booking in, because you could attract a heck of a lot of people in there, and I think it would bring other things up. So I think busking is exactly what it says and what we've had in the past. It is people from time to time plying their wares in various places around the high street to add to the ambiance, as they say. But so really, if I could just hear whether or not the bid was consulted, if anybody's here that could let me know.
Well, I sit on the bid on behalf of the council, and it didn't come up at an advisory meeting we had last week or the week before last.
Because I really do feel it should. So if yours is the only comment that can be fielded, I believe this should really go so that they're consulted, because we don't want another thing to come back with the public or our partners saying that they weren't consulted. I just want to, does Mr. Littlemore know, or John Foster?
Thank you, Councillor Hooks. I don't know specifically if the bid were consulted as an individual organisation. I know the consultation was widely received, so we did have quite a number of the business from responses from the business community, particularly those on Week Street. I can certainly go back and find out whether the bid was specifically consulted. But yes, police colleagues and others who are also involved with the one bid would have been consulted. I know they were, but yeah, I can come back to you on that. Thank you.
And also, I suppose in turn that would get back to the ambassadors that walk around, and they might hear more comments from general public, might be saying it's not what they want, or it's too loud, or it's not loud enough. So if you could, that would be lovely. Thank you very much. And I suppose that would go back to licensing, or will it come back here, your findings?
No, the report is now going to the Communities Housing Environment Committee for adoption, so we can certainly feed back the comments for members to consider before they make final approval.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, Councillor Bob Hinder, please.
Thank you, Chair. On page 15 of the busking guidelines, I raised this at the licensing hearing, because there's an anomaly in paragraph 3 whereby it's advice to buskers as to the level of street noise, ambient street noise, and not going above it. But there seems to be an anomaly, because it states to the guidance to the buskers, if the sound they make can be heard on the other side of the street, this will be considered unreasonable. Now, I raised this at licensing and said that I didn't feel that that was possible, and therefore that shouldn't be there, but I notice it's still in the guidelines. could we have guidance on that, please?
Do you want me to answer that, Chair?
Yes, please.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Hinder. You're quite right. You did mention that, and the final version that goes before Chi Committee will have that amendment, so that the clarification that you sought at Licensing Committee will be included before the final document is signed off. Thank you.
Thank you very much, John.
Okay, thanks, Bob. Faye, Councillor Gooch, please.
Thank you, Chairman. This is one of these ideas that would be a lovely idea. In theory, oh yeah, wouldn't it be nice? But I have to say, in practice, it would need an awful lot of control, an awful lot of management. I certainly agree what's just been said by my colleagues, and thank you, Councillor Hinder, for bringing out that point, because I found it quite funny, actually, when I read that paragraph about mustn't be heard on the opposite side of the road. I thought it was quite amusing. I'd like to see that happen. Funnily enough, I do think it's right where it says, the report says that it needs a high footfall. It really does. My dad was a busker in London with his guitar. He certainly wouldn't have made any money in Hyde Park. He stayed outside all the main picture houses as they were at the time. Made himself a lot of money, but that's another story, and certainly lost it. I certainly support the idea of having this guidelines. I think it's very, very useful. I do think we ought to, at least out of courtesy, let the bid know, even if we just drop them an email or something to say, hey, by the way, this is what we've approved. Your colleagues know about it. Here's a copy for your information. I do think we ought to keep them in the loop, because they are such a major part of helping us to promote Maidstone. Thank you, Chairman.
I think it should be before that.
Thank you, Faye. I will, as I say, a member of the advisory committee to the bid, I'll email this committee report on to them tomorrow, so that they have a copy of it. So I'll do that tomorrow as an action. I'm just wondering, really, obviously, John, you've heard that, John Littlemore, you've heard the comments mentioned this evening. I think, whilst I understand what they're looking at trying to achieve with the guidelines, I think Frenchley Gardens and the bandstand would probably suit street theatre as opposed to busking, for the reasons actually Faye outlined. You know, if you're busking, you want to have a big passing trade, whereas the sorry, I was just looking at IM, something moved on that. Whereas if you're doing street theatre, you would probably bring your audience with you. So I think they're sort of slightly different things. But so if we could feed these comments back to Chi when you discuss it, that would be helpful. So on that basis, is everybody happy to sort of agree what we've been talking about and to move on? I take silence.
Agreed.
Agreed.
Okay, thank you, everybody. Before I go on to item 15, I just wanted to explain to members of the public who are probably maybe watching this live as to why we haven't gone straight to the Hazlitt Arts Centre report. And the reason is that the Arts Centre report is in two parts. There's the element on the public papers, which we'll obviously be discussing clearly in public, but there's also an exempt item which has more commercially sensitive information, which if members of the committee wish to discuss, we need to do that in what they call part 2 in a private session where members of the public won't be able to hear what we're saying, unfortunately, for commercial reasons, as you'd understand. So rather than trying to end up having a completely disjointed discussion on the Hazlitt, I decided, speaking with the officers last week, that we would keep the running order as it is now. It does mean, unfortunately, if you're waiting for the Hazlitt Arts Centre, you'll have the benefit of listening to us on all the other committee items tonight, which then takes us on to item number 15, which is the strategic plan, proposed areas for focus 21, 22 to 2021 to 2026, and the key performance indicators for COVID-19 recovery. and this report's to be introduced, I believe, by Anna Collier. So over to you, Anna.
Thank you, Chairman, and good evening, members. The Council Strategic Plan was adopted in 2019 till 2045, and in July last year, the Policy and Resources Committee agreed that the Council would undertake a refresh of the plan. There's been significant progress in the areas of focus since the plan was adopted, and outline of this progress is shown in Appendix A of your papers. There was also a very important need to ensure that the Council's resources are in place to respond to the significant change and impact that the Borough has experienced as a result of the pandemic. The report in front of members asks this committee to provide feedback on the proposed changes of focus for the period 2021 to 26, especially in those areas within the remit of this committee. And these can be seen at Appendix C of the report. These new areas of focus were drafted based upon feedback from all members on future priorities, which we received in the summer. The public's feedback on the impact of the pandemic from a survey that was undertaken with them last year, and feedback and consideration from members and officers in the intervening months as we've responded to the pandemic, and decisions have been made which have been reflected in the report. This report was presented to Policy and Resources Committee on the 20th of January, and the following feedback was given by members in the relation to areas within the remit of this committee. That the cultural sector is important to Regeneration, and for consideration to be given for this to be included in the plan. That references to the Hazlitt are central, and consider rewording some of the section. That references to museum better reflect the transformation plan that's already in place, and to consider changes that have been made to the section in pride in the borough and pride in our communities. Finally, members are invited to provide feedback on the set of proposed key performance indicators at Appendix D. These have been selected in order to ensure that the Council can monitor progress towards recovery, and will replace the Council's current KPI set. That's the end of my introduction. I'm happy to take any questions and feedback, and obviously Angela Woodhouse is also here, and the Chief Executive as well, with any questions.
Thank you, Anna. I'll be opening this up in a minute to debate, but obviously the items you referred to earlier will feed back to myself. So after I've taken some people, I'll go through those in more detail for the committee, and hopefully other members on the committee will be able to endorse those. So Councillor Cox, first of all.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. It's a point of clarity, really. I want to know whether I don't want to bark up the wrong tree, as it were. Could Ms. Collier please, am I at Appendix C? This is what we are proposing to put before P&R 1, and that's correct? Anna, could you come back on that, please?
Anna, you're on mute at the moment.
Sorry, I couldn't unmute myself. Sorry, my button was stuck. Yes.
Yes, okay, lovely. So stay unmuted. Because it says implementing the Go Green, Go Wild project to embrace and encourage biodiversity. It says delete right beside it, but then on the back it says see also amended agenda. Are we saying that we're going to take the Go Green, Go Wild and bring it together with the biodiversity and climate change strategy more? Or is it that we don't delete Go Green, Go Wild completely and that's it?
So it is to delete the existing area of focus, which we had for 2019 to 24, and replace it with the proposed area of focus, which includes the biodiversity. So there is the amended focus below.
Yeah.
sorry, if I could come in as well, Councillor Cox. That's with, if you recall, when we took this through policy and resources, not the last time, but the time before, or even actually back in September, there was discussion about not naming specific projects and keeping things strategic. Yep. And the biodiversity and climate change strategy is a huge document that's overarching and actually will take up this project and other bits. So it's felt that that would make more sense to roll, like as you described, roll it up and put it into a more strategic area of focus.
That's the point of clarity, which you've now both endorsed. So that is lovely. Thank you very much for answering my question.
Actually, on that point, Angela, I'm just looking at on page, it's page 39 or page 30. It's the numbering has sort of got overlaid. So I'm not quite sure. I don't think it's page 3,930. I don't think our agenda's that big.
No.
The item where I can see where you've moved it down to, because that item, if you like, in the first column is only described as improving air quality. Yet we're moving down, if you like, issues around biodiversity.
Yeah.
And so I'm just, perhaps we could suggest amending that. So rather than just saying improving air quality, I think if it was air quality and biodiversity, then I think it would, make sure that...
Apologies if the table isn't clear. I think the point is that what we're suggesting is actually improving air quality would go as well, because it's included in this much bigger agenda. So improving air quality would be amended to reflect the Council's declaration of climate change and biodiversity emergencies, and we'll have something that captures, actually, it's all about climate change and biodiversity, which encapsulates air quality, things like Go Green, Go Wild, all sorts of different issues. I think you've got some bullet points underneath that show that, so things like a carbon neutral council estate. There's a huge number of actions within that, so rather than picking out different things, it'd be better just to have one area of focus that reflects that new plan and strategy. So that really shows how the council's moved on from when we first produced this document, when we didn't have a biodiversity and climate change strategy and we had lots of different things going on, to say actually let's just have one area of focus. So that's what we're proposing in this. Okay, so if the committee supports that, that'd be helpful. But if you feel there's other things you want to pull out, that's helpful too. So happy to take your feedback.
No, I think the feeling was, I'm sure Martin would support this. It's just as long as it's going to be called air quality, or as you say, the climate change and biodiversity emergency, just because otherwise, when I read it, I just thought, well, these things, if we're lumping it just under improving air quality, well, so obviously that's key and critical for everyone. So is biodiversity, and so I think you've explained it. No, thank you, Angela. I've got Jonathan Pearl. Jonathan, you'd like to come in?
Thank you, Chairman. Just a question concerning page 40 of the bundle. Obviously, you're aware that later in the tonight's agenda, the recommendation for item 17 is that the council continues to pay its agreed contract with the operator of Hazlitt Arts Theatre, etc., etc. Page 40, we have instead of recommendation, the recommended text is that we reshape the offer from the Hazlitt Arts Centre to match the resources available, which reads like something from Yes Minster or something like that. How are these two recommendations compatible?
Are you talking about what's on the papers to what's happening on the agenda tonight?
Yes.
I think that's the point.
So I think that's the point that's addressed after that, which is subject to further consideration. So I think at the time that this was shaped, it was based upon the conversations that we're having in the previous year. And
in terms of the strategic plan, the wording that we're proposing to go into it as an area of focus would be the new wording, which is on the other side of the column, which I appreciate is confusing, that says deliver a sustainable leisure and cultural offer for the borough. The bullet points explain what's meant by that, but as Anna said, obviously this was drafted pre-decisions and with things still in progress, hence the subject to further consideration.
Okay.
Okay, can I just check, does anybody else at this point want to come in? Otherwise I'll go through some of the points I've made a note of, which I raised, some of which at P&R last week, since they're pertinent to us. No? Okay. Well, look, I'll go through by page on this. So the first comment I've got is on page 21 or page 30, which is the appendix where we're looking at some of the actions completed to date. And the one I wanted to refer to on this sorry, I should have put my teeth in properly. The one I wanted to mention at the moment was the bottom one, which is around enabling events which assist people increasing pride in their communities and their environment. Whilst those 5 bullet points are true and actually correct, they weren't really part of the project which this item was referring to. Now, members of the committee who are on the committee back in either 2018 or 18 or 19 when this was coming up, what we were looking at, we had a discussion about this, was this concept of a sense of place. And as people remember, we were looking at doing work in terms of engendering pride in Maidstone, and that we also had funding, and we still have funding to actually undertake some work on that. And so while these sort of things have added to pride, we haven't actually reached the conclusion on that, which I'll refer to in a minute. So then if we can turn over the pages through to Appendix C. There we go. On Appendix C, so page 39 or 30, where we come on to a thriving place, which is primarily where most of our committee's issues are. So the first one we've got there is delivering key actions for the refreshed economic development strategy, focusing on actions to enable economic recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic. Common sense. Now, I was just going to add in, because where we've got with focus on, and I think it ties into work we've been doing and work which is ongoing, which is around the arts and cultural sector. As we all know, and we've been discussing previously, the cultural sector is a good agent for regeneration. So I think we should just add in there at the bottom of the current one, which goes all destination Maidstone Town Centre, then add in after that, using the cultural sector as an agent of regeneration, because that's an important role for the cultural sector, and it links very much into some of the aspirations of the committee. So that's my first comment. And then my next one is moving on to deliver a sustainable leisure and cultural offer for the borough. And it was picking up the point Jonathan mentioned, because that's what I raised at P&R last week. Where we got the wording, reshape the offer, is written down there. I was thinking we should be looking at, depending what we decide, obviously later this evening. So, not totally prejudging it, but assuming that we do adopt the recommendations before us, the wording there, I think, should be something like work with the Hazlitt Arts Centre to see a transformation of the arts and cultural base in Maidstone. So positively working with with Parkwood and the Hazlitt Arts Centre to help see transformation of our arts and cultural base. And then the next one, next bullet down, which is reshape the offer from Maidstone museums to match resources and adapt to future service delivery opportunities to improve access. Well, I'd suggest that we adjust that slightly to read more along the lines of adjust the museum transformation plan to match resources obtainable from both Maidstone Borough Council and external sources. Now, the reason I'm suggesting that on that one is that the committee and Martin Round and Jonathan weren't on it when we made the decision just over a year ago to adopt the museum transformation plan. Despite not receiving the Arts Council grant, the transformation plan is still, I think, the way forward longer term for the museum, but clearly, obviously, it will take longer to implement. So we will come on this evening later. We do have an element of council resource, £389,000, and we would be looking in March at some suggestions of how we can use that towards helping the transformation plan and helping to reduce either running costs or generate new income. So I would suggest we adapt the wording there to reflect, as I say, the museum transformation plan. And then moving on to page 41 or 32, whichever numbering scheme we want to work on, is the item about enabling events which assist people increasing their pride in communities and our environment. Now, I don't agree with the comments about replacing and see community engagement objective below, because I think that's looking at something completely different. I think we still, as a borough, need to do a lot more work in increasing pride in the borough and in our communities. And so I would suggest that we retain that and perhaps, so as I say, retain where it says in that first column, enabling events which assist people in increasing their pride in their communities and our environment. And that in the next column, in the wording, we could add in something like aim to work with the Arts and Cultural Officer on a sense of place and looking to setting up a Maidstone Arts and Cultural Forum. And what else have I written down here? Yeah, just because obviously the sense of place was actually referred to in a conference. I was at the Kent and Medway Business Conference, which is held once a year, last Friday, or Friday before last. And a third of the conference was devoted purely to discussing placemaking and sense of place and having pride in communities, which was an issue pan-Kent. And we had a presentation from the leader of Shropshire Council, who was a Conservative and is working with his Labour colleague from Shrewsbury about how they're doing work on that. And it's such an important thing that I do think we still need to leave it there and continue with the work which is moving on slowly in the background, looking at that. So I'd suggest that. And I think, yeah, that's the end of my detailed comments on that. Got a quick question on Appendix D, which is the COVID recovery KPIs. And I just wanted to confirm that obviously all those down for the economy clearly would be featuring on our agendas after this has been agreed by Policy and Resources, clearly, as we're responsible for the economy. And so we would be receiving in future a monthly KPI report relating to these COVID factors. That's the end of my spiel on this. Don't know if anybody would like to. Anna, I can see you kind of.
Oh, I wasn't sure. Did you want me to answer that? Answer that question? Was that one for me?
Yeah. I think in terms of the COVID-19 KPIs, yeah. Just to check.
So this would replace our existing set. So you would receive the indicators pertinent for this committee, as you do at the moment.
Okay, that's fine. That pretty well answers my point. Councillor Martin Cox has a question on Appendix D. Martin.
Thank you, Chair. Just on D specifically, after hearing information about the grants and the scale and the amount of time it's taking our staff, is the number of grants to be awarded giving us a weekly update? Is that too high? Should that move to just monthly, or is it something that we're going to be taking to the COVID recovery group and we need to have that? I don't know. What are your views? I think it's a bit high frequency myself. Don't want to give too much work.
John Foster, any comment?
Well, only that we can collect the statistics weekly, but in terms of reporting to this committee in the same way that Anna has said, it will be just rolled up in terms of the information presented to you. So when you do get it, it will be part of the KPIs in the normal way. Obviously, we're not suggesting that we provide you with weekly updates on the number of grants we give you to the committee. That wouldn't make sense.
So do we change it to monthly? Is of any benefit to do that? I just think it's less reporting that you have to compile.
Yeah, I mean, if we're looking at, I suppose you're right, because if we're looking at this as KPIs coming to committees, then obviously it's got to be monthly because this committee only meets monthly. But obviously in terms of the officer's own internal workings, clearly they would be, as John said, getting the data weekly. So, yeah, I mean, as this is focused, if you like, on councillors' KPIs, and I suppose having that as a monthly one probably would make sense, wouldn't it?
Or is it that you want to keep a closer eye, Mr. Foster, on, so you need to see weekly in case there's a massive increase?
No, I think you're absolutely right. Monthly for this committee is absolutely fine. So let's change it to monthly.
Right. So if we report quarterly, report quarterly, but for the purpose of us collating this information as a department, and for understanding how that information comes in, it's important for us to know the frequency, but we will continue to report quarterly. So I'm sorry that I can see how that's misleading, but normally we do indicate how frequent we collect the data. So I think we will collect it and collate it on that basis, but we will report it back to the committee quarterly as we do normally, unless you wanted to see something specifically on a more regular basis. Is that helpful?
Yeah, thank you, Anne, for that. I was going to say, I think as we're the committee responsible for monitoring our economy, and clearly massive damage is being done to it now. I mean, the news is all about the damage on the hospitality and cultural sectors, which are a large part of our town centre here. I would think if we're collecting the information monthly, either it should be reported monthly to the committee, or, John, because all those come under him, should be emailing it out to committee, and we work on the basis that we've done in the past, is that emailed information, if anybody then requests it to be discussed at the next committee meeting, I talk with the officers to do that, because I think we need to look at this on, these figures as they come out each month. Looking at it just on a quarterly reactive basis, I think with what's going to be a fast-moving situation, I don't think would really work for councillors.
Happy to leave that to Ms. Collier to decide exactly the wording, but I just wanted to raise it. It looked strange. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. I'll come up and see if I can find a way that's easy enough for officers to do, and so that members get the regular information, and I'll come up with a solution.
Okay, thanks, Joanna, on that. Faye, Councillor Gooch.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to say that I supported the amendments that you put forward, Chairman, but I didn't take them down verbatim. I'm sorry. So if you're looking to me for a recommendation, boy, have you got a hope, because I didn't write it down. But I certainly think it was very good that we adjust it as you suggested, and I thought that might be helpful. I hope somebody was writing it down.
Yeah, can I just check if everybody is largely supportive of the points I mentioned earlier? Then I'm just thinking in terms of the record. I don't know, Olivia, if you managed to get any of it down. Otherwise, I can quickly read through the points again. Or just obviously
can't Paul just send them to you? Yeah, you've got them written down.
I've got it written. If the easiest thing is if we can agree the report, agree the comments I added, and I'll email the comments tomorrow to Olivia, and I'll copy everybody in on the committee, obviously. So, it's what I read out earlier rather than holding us up now. Is everybody happy that we do that? Yeah, and Jonathan's put it was recorded via the webcast. It'll only be that word. Great. Okay, great. Thanks everybody for that. In which case, going back to the agenda bundle, the next item, number 16, is our medium-term financial strategy and budget proposals on page 50 to 62. And I think Mark Green was going to introduce this evening.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good evening, members. This is the report that comes to the committee every January, setting out budget proposals for services within your area. And the report starts by explaining the context, and this builds on the report on the medium-term financial strategy that came to the committee back in December. And there is an update on the position reported then, which is summarised on page 54. And this shows that the overall budget gap for next year has reduced from 2.4 million to 1.6 million. So it's moving in the right direction, but it's still a very significant budget gap. The proposals here, together with savings proposals going to the other committees, aim to fill that budget gap, not in 1 year, but over a period of 3 years, which was always the plan as set out in the MTFS. We couldn't hope to fill the budget gap just in 1 year, but by phasing in the savings, we could cover it. And the report sets out the proposals specifically relating to this committee, and they respond to the challenge that was set by Policy and Resources Committee last summer to look at a couple of things. First of all, what savings could be made by reprioritising the strategic plan, and what kind of transformational savings could be delivered. And the two specific things to highlight for this committee are that on the reprioritisation of the strategic plan, it was recognised that it might be appropriate to take a more modest direction of travel in relation to the museum, and it's already been rehearsed at this committee how savings can be delivered at the museum, which would total 152,000. And the other area that's highlighted here is capital investment to generate revenue savings, where there's work that the economic development team does, which is related to capital investment and can be charged to capital rather than revenue. So those are two quite significant savings items, but unfortunately for this committee, they're offset by a number of adjustments we've had to make to the budget. And I won't go through all of them in detail, but they're set out in paragraph 214 of the report. Together with other savings, the net effect for this committee is quite a modest contribution to the overall savings target. But obviously, all of these savings count, so I hope that members will agree to those going forward to Policy and Resources Committee. And the final thing covered in the report is the capital programme proposals. The four items in the capital programme are all ones that were already in the capital programme. Obviously, the capital programme is a rolling 5-year programme, and they cover the visitor centre and the dam works at Moat Park, the Mall bus station redevelopment scheme, and the museum development plan. Those are summarised in Appendix B in the report. So I'll leave it at that, Mr. Chairman, and obviously happy to take any questions that you may have on the detail of the proposals. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mark. I open this to debate. If anyone has any points, not surprisingly, I have a number to raise, but I want to see if anyone else wishes to raise anything. Faye, yeah.
Thank you, Chairman. I get really worried about this budget business, and that's one of the reasons that I originally supported the what we had been planning to do on the Hazlitt, and without trying to preempt what we're going to discuss in the report towards the end of the meeting. The pressure of having to provide a balanced budget for next year, never mind the next 3 years, but certainly for next year, it's still very huge. Now, on the previous item, we've just been talking about a thriving place, and even at the COVID Recovery Board, we have recognised the importance of economic recovery. And this boils down to my concern over deleting 2 posts in economic development. Mark, I know you've said about a lot of it can be covered by capital, but I think there's going to be a lot of, shall I say, groundwork, I don't know how to put it really, operational work, I think I mean, to try to assist our businesses and our communities get back on their feet. And I'm really concerned about reducing both posts. That's where I am at the moment. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Faye. I'll ask the officers to come back after we've had any inputs from it. Sorry, I'll take a glass of water. Any inputs from any other members of the committee? Would anyone else like to add anything at this point? No. Well, if not, I've got a couple of points I'll raise then for now. I fully support, as I put in the IM, what Faye said, because I raised it at Policy and Resources when this report went there, and I think as we're responsible for economic regeneration and clearly bringing our economy out of COVID, I think whilst I can understand the officers were looking to present savings they felt could be achieved, I grave concerns, and this is the item on page 57, to deleting vacant posts at the present time. I understand one of the posts was mainly related to project work, and the intention in future is to employ project managers and consultants as each scheme comes through, clearly, because you have different skill bases for, say, a housing project to doing Moat Park Dam, for instance. So I can see a logic behind that, but I think the second post here, I think could be reducing our economic regeneration team too much, and I would be suggesting that we feed back to Policy and Resources that consideration be given to that. And in particular, I'll draw people's attention in relationship to this to page 55. And it might sound possibly slightly anal, but if you look at page 55, in the notes, you've got note C and note D. And I raise these to Policy and Resources, and I think Councillor Mackay raised them strategic planning, because what note C is telling us is that the council has received £860,000 in respect of COVID-19. It's an unring-fenced grant. However, at the moment, we don't have any plans in the budget to spend that money. And so, and I raised this at the COVID-19 meeting last week. And I know the Chief Executive, who's on the call this evening, is going to bring a report back to the steering group and obviously onto Policy and Resources to look at the 860,000. Now, I would think that given the importance of the economy and the need to ensure that recovers well, that could be a potential funding source for one of the 2 posts which was being deleted from the revenue budget, because we could probably use some of the 860 to fund a fixed term job for, say, 2 years whilst we're getting through the immediate post-COVID recovery. And I do think it's important for councillors to note that in paragraphs, in notes C and D, there is £1 million, less £1,000, which, if not used, would actually reduce the budget gap to only £600,000. That's my concerns on the economic development post. The other one is around the museum's capital. We had discussions, obviously, at a meeting before last when we agreed the reductions on the museum, which I know are currently going through staff consultation, which started 2 weeks ago and is currently, as I say, proceeding through the full consultation. As part of those discussions, we agreed that the capital we had, which is £389,000, we would look to bring projects forward which would help with 2, well, I suppose effectively 3 items: museum transformation plan, helping to potentially either reduce revenue and running costs at the museum, for generating additional income. Now, I've had discussions with the Vice Chair and with the officers and with the Museum Director. The intention at the moment is to bring an outline report of what options, and there are a couple of options at least they might look like, to, as I said earlier, either our March or April committee, with a view, subject to the committee then adopting one of the options, of a worked up proposal to our meeting either in June or July, again with a view to looking at implementing works in December of this year, because under the new opening arrangements for the museum, during December and January each year, the museum will be closed to normal entrance as part of the annualised hour approach we've agreed. So December and January are clearly good months in the museum in future to do capital or any other work. So I would suggest that we either seek assurance from Mark that monies would be available for us to bring forward if we ultimately want to adopt a project starting later this calendar year, or if he can't, assure us on that tonight, perhaps we should be moving a recommendation that we request policy and resources to bring forward that item in the capital programme. So those are the points I wanted to raise on that. So really over to Mark to give us some guidance on those points, please. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chair. On the first point about the funding for the economic development officers, what I think it's important for members to do is to distinguish between the ongoing budget gap, which is what the report is referring to when it talks about 1.6 million. So that's 1.6 million, not just next year, but forever into the future. And one-off items like this £1 million that the government is giving us next year, or well, total of a million being 860,000 and 139,000. And the government is being relatively generous to local authorities in the short term because they recognise that there's a real challenge with COVID-19, but they're keeping us on quite a tight rein. They're not being generous in the long term. They're saying we've got money to spend to deal with COVID, but they haven't given us any more money in the longer term. And in fact, in the longer term, the position is still very uncertain for local authorities without a new local authority funding settlement, and that's been postponed at least until next year, maybe longer. So we do still have the challenge of bridging the budget gap, and what would be a problem for us is if members started taking items out of the budget proposals, because we would then have to find other things to plug the gap. But what isn't nearly so much of an issue is saying, well, we've got this 860,000. If there's a short-term need, and I think you alluded to this, to fund a post to help businesses get back on their feet after COVID-19, and then absolutely that's the right way of using that 860,000. And what I suggested at Policy and Resources Committee last week, and I think that this is also what the Chief Executive is saying, is that we can monitor the pressures that 860,000 is designed to address, and to the extent that the spare resource, we certainly don't want to kind of put it away in the kitty. We should be using it to help Maidstone recover from COVID-19. So, I mean, what I suggest that members might want to do is to indicate a wish to use some of that 860,000 for funding for an economic development officer, if that's a specific thing that you have in mind, rather than take the proposed saving out of the base budget. So that would be my suggestion on that point that both you and Councillor Gooch have made. On the capital spend, what happens with capital schemes is that an overall funding allocation is set out in the capital programme, and then when individual schemes are ready to come forward, a report is brought to Policy and Resources Committee to approve the scheme. And what I'd suggest on that is that when a scheme is ready for the museum, it comes to Policy and Resources Committee, and at that point the Constitution does allow for money to be transferred within the capital programme. So if there's enough money overall within the capital programme to bring money forward from what was allocated in a later year for the museum, then the committee, Policy and Resources Committee, would be able to do that. And to be honest, there usually is spare capacity within the capital programme, because we usually see schemes slipping from one year to the next. So obviously I can't guarantee that that will be the case, or that Policy and Resources Committee would agree a virement or transfer in the way that I've indicated, but that would be a way of funding work on the museum earlier than indicated in these papers. So I hope that's clear and helps.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. I was just scribbling down because I was going to, I think, to help encapsulate what Faye and I were saying and what you just said in your answer. The third recommendation would actually make that clearer. So if everyone could just give me 30 seconds to finish my scribbling, and I can read out what I've written. Okay, look, I'm going to move from the chair the two reports, two recommendations on page 50. So I'll just read them out for anybody listening. So the first recommendation is that the revenue budget proposals for services within the remit of this committee, as set out in Appendix A, be agreed for submission to the Policy and Resources Committee. And secondly, that the capital budget proposals for services within the remit of this committee, as set out in Appendix B, be agreed to submission to the Policy and Resources Committee. And then add in a third one, a number 3, which would be consider using part of the £860,000 COVID-19 recovery fund to pay for a 2-year fixed-term economic development officer, and that in respect of the Maidstone Museum capital programme, schemes progress and reports be presented on timing to future meetings of this committee. I don't know, Olivia, did you manage to get that down, or you pick up the precise wording?
Chairman, I got down to that in respect of the Maidstone Museum capital programme. It's after that point that I've... Okay, so schemes progress and reports be presented to the committee on timing and appropriate recommendations made. It's just so that we encapsulate, I'm trying to encapsulate both the points which were raised in Mark's answer, so it's formally documented what we as a committee are wanting to do. So if I could see a seconder for that.
Chairman, I'd like to comment before I second.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Mark, for explaining. I found that very, very helpful. Chairman, you said consider using some of that recovery fund. Aren't we requesting?
Yeah, okay, requesting,
Yeah.
sorry.
Would you? Yeah, I think that would just give it a bit of oomph. And when you're referring to the capital, may I suggest that it's a separate item? I've got a thing about confusing revenue and capital. Keep them both very, very separate. So you've got
number 4 then.
A 3 and a 4, if you don't mind, Chairman, and then I'll be happy to second.
Okay, I'm more than happy with those couple of changes, so I'm happy for you to second. So I see we've got Martin Cox would like to raise a point of order.
I believe it's a point of order. You said, Mr. Chairman, that as set out in Appendix A, yet you're varying Appendix A by your next recommendation, because Appendix A carries the information about the £72,000 saving. Am I not correct?
Okay, so what we need Len to do on that wording, then, where it says that's set out in Appendix A, then it should say subject to recommendation 3 below, shouldn't it?
Exactly. You need to make reference to it, if I'm correct. Is that correct?
Well spotted. Oh, there's a SWAT in the classroom, isn't there?
Yes, no, I'm happy to accept that additional amendment. So with all those, can we move to the vote? If anybody is against or opposes, could I see? Otherwise, we'll just take it as agreed. Thank you for that, Diana. So can I take it? Everyone's happy to agree that unanimously, yeah? Okay.
Yep. Agreed.
Great. Thanks everybody. And that finishes that item. So
thank you.
Which then takes us on to the item I'm sure members of the public have been waiting for, which is the Hazlitt Arts Centre options, which kick off on page 63 of our agenda pack and run obviously then to the end of our papers. We have Mr. Keith Nicholson who would like to address the committee. So Mr. Nicholson, if you're still on the conference call, this is your opportunity. You can address the committee for, I believe it's up to 3 minutes. So, Mr. Nicholson, if you're online, if you'd like to address to us now, please. Mr. Nicholson, I can see you're on the you're on. I don't know if you've got to talk to people now. Olivia, I don't know if yourself or someone from IT could perhaps help Mr. Nicholson.
Yes, Chairman, I can see he's on the call but having difficulties at the moment. If possible, if we could get Mr. Nicholson to be able to connect fully, we could come back to him after the officer introduction, if that would be okay.
Yes, that's okay. Yes. So what we do is, Mr. Nicholson, we'll come once the officers have helped you. You can do your presentation to the committee, but just while they're doing that, I'll ask for Mike Evans, the author of the report, to introduce it. Mike, over to you.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, members and members of the public this evening. I'm conscious that some people are a lot closer to this subject than others, and for the benefit of the public viewing at home, in presenting this report, I'd like to provide an overview of the work that's been done since the Policy and Resources meeting on the 25th of November. As you stated earlier, Chair, this is a Part 1 report with a Part 2 exempt appendix. The exempt appendix includes information that is commercially sensitive to Parkwood Leisure, and they do not wish for those items to be made public, hence including them in an exempt appendix for members only. In the report, we refer to the Hazlitt Arts Centre, which includes the main auditorium, the Exchange Studio, the Fourth Wall, and the Graham Clark Gallery. Any mentions to the theatre are to the Arts Centre as a whole. It's important to make the distinction that it does include those other spaces. So at the 25th of November Policy and Resources meeting, we were tasked with completing further work in the key areas, and they were exploration of external funding available to the Hazlitt, engagement activities for members and stakeholders, exploring the COVID-19 related developments, and looking at future sustainability. So I'll briefly cover each of those. On the external funding, there was no appeals process to the Cultural Recovery Fund, but there was some strong MP support. However, those conversations have stalled, so it's fair to conclude that pursuit was not successful. However, there is a new Cultural Recovery Fund, Cultural Recovery Fund 2, and that looks at future sustainability of the cultural sector. The funding criteria are different this time round, and the fund covers activity between the 1st of April and the 30th of June 2021. So it's a small funding window, but working with Parkwood Leisure, we have submitted a bid, and I'm pleased to say that was submitted earlier today, today being the deadline for applications. Engagement activities have been completed with members and stakeholders. Stakeholder surveys have reinforced the importance of the venue. That was never in doubt, but it's shown how demand for the building is so important from community groups, and it's also highlighted some of the technical aspects as well, and revealed that they are the only place in the borough where they're available. Meetings with representatives from the Arts Council and KCC have identified other future funding opportunities, but they are project specific and do not relate to the immediate ongoing losses at the Hazlitt at the moment. They will be valuable avenues for future project work, and we've discussed the possibility of that work with Parkwood Leisure, but at the time being, they're not of kind of great use to us for this purpose. The biggest area of change since the 25th of November meeting of Policy and Resources is in the area of COVID-19 related developments. At the member briefing, we shared a timeline with members. For those who are not present and for the public this evening, the developments we've seen since November 2020 include the end of the November lockdown and Maidstone being placed in Tier 3 at the start of December. Maidstone was then moved to Tier 4. Christmas plans were altered and restrictions were tightened. The Pfizer vaccine has been approved and given to its first patients, and Oxford's vaccine was also approved in December. Then into January 21, and schools were closed with lessons moved online as part of another national lockdown. Hospital numbers and cases continue to rise, but the vaccine rollout has moved forward with some pace. Predictions on when the vaccine programme will be completed are ever changing, but it's fair to say that experts are forecasting the priority group will be vaccinated by the summer, and the ambition at government level remains for the remainder of the population to be vaccinated by the end of this year. So there's been a lot of change in the COVID developments almost daily, and we've been constantly evaluating that as part of this report. The final area to look at was future sustainability. Parkwood Leisure has submitted its Year 8 business plan and forecast various scenarios for us. All scenarios involve reopening the community access when able to do so, and reopening the main auditorium when restrictions are lifted and with social distancing in place. Reopening will incur losses compared to normal trading circumstances, but those losses will be minimised by the ticket sales that are possible during that time. The business plan some changes to the traditional service delivery, for example, live shows being broadcast online, available via the Hazlitt website, and we continue to discuss outdoor open air options with them, which are a feature of the contract and will be more significant this summer. So that explains the areas of background work. Paragraph 3.1 of the report gives the context for the decision. It includes the need to balance all the issues at hand, which are the Arts Centre providing a venue which contributes to Maidstone being a thriving place. It is protected in terms of a covenant, and it cannot be used for any other purpose. It's important to remind everyone at that point, again, to reassure those who fear the Hazlitt Arts Centre may be used for another purpose other than a theatre and cultural venue. That's not possible with the covenant in place. The council has a contract for service delivery at the venue, but the contract cannot be wholly performed by the operator through no fault of its own. The government PPN contract guidance that was first issued in April and again in June 2020 has expired, and the government has not issued any further guidance for the period from 1st of November onwards. The uncertainty in the economy and in the industry remains, and the council is managing its own significantly challenged financial position, as we discussed in the previous agenda item. So quite a lot of background work, and before taking questions, I'll move through the options because there was an additional one that was added in. It's in the report. It's there for reading, but it's additional since the member briefing. So our work revealed 5 options, and a further 6th option was then raised by members at the briefing. Those options are the ones presented in the report.
Could you speak slightly slower, because the reception isn't particularly perfect. So I just think if you could just slow down a bit.
Okay. Yes, thank you, Chair. Thank you for that helpful reminder. So through our work in the background, we identified 5 options, and then a further 6th option was raised by members at the briefing. Those options are the ones presented in the report. The options have been discussed with Parkwood Leisure. However, it is worth remembering that Parkwood Leisure is in contract and is not obliged to do anything other than follow the requirements that are set out in the contract. So option 1 was to follow the Year 8 Parkwood business plan. In this option, the council continues to tolerate the current position. The regular contract payments are made in full and no services are delivered from the venue. When restrictions allow, services will resume in line with the business plan. This is the recommended option in the report, but it still comes with some uncertainty. The situation is ever changing. There are new variants and new strains being identified, and the effectiveness of the vaccine is still unknown. And for this reason, it's proposed a future report is brought again to this committee, suggested in April 2021. Option 2 is to follow an interim arrangement. Members will find the detail of this interim arrangement in the exempt appendix. For the public attending, not divulge the detail of this arrangement, as previously explained, but it did not fully address the current situation from the council's perspective, and so it is not recommended. Option 3 was a temporary arrangement proposed by the council. When reviewing the business plan, we saw that reopening in May causes increased losses, and that is caused predominantly by the ending of the furlough scheme. We proposed a longer closure to allow Parkwood to remain closed for longer, which would then allow them to recommence in December when the business is at its most profitable time. Parkwood does not want to enter into this temporary arrangement. The forecast losses in the business plan are mitigated by the recommencement of performances in May 2021. So with no performances in May and without fellow support, Parkwood would have to look at redundancies again, and they would only do that with increased payments from the council and with an indemnity in place. So this option is not recommended. Option 4 was the one suggested by members at the briefing. It's based on the council making the full contract payments for no services during the pandemic, and then followed by a reciprocal arrangement where the council reduces its payments at a time in the future to be scheduled between now and 2028 when the contract ends. In this way, the council can continue to support Parkwood while the industry is suffering, and Parkwood can schedule a reduced payment from the council at a time when it can better afford to do so. Parkwood's representatives are not in favour of this approach because they cannot be certain of profitability in future years. So this option cannot be recommended to you this evening. Options 5 and 6 were the termination options. Option 5 is to terminate through negotiation. This route is likely to become protracted because there is not a lot of common ground at the moment, so this option is not recommended. Option 6 is to terminate under the contract. The PPN 0420 guidance, although no longer enforced, advised that where the basic commercial assumptions that underpin the viability of the original contract can no longer be maintained, the contract should be varied or terminated. Options 2, 3 and 4 would have been variations to the current contract and would have altered its terms in response to the ongoing situation. However, they are not suitable to one or either of party. Now, as the report states at 4.1, the council recognises that it is not the fault of Parkwood Leisure that services cannot be delivered under the contract. However, this question this report seeks to address is how long should the council accept non-performance of services before termination becomes the more favourable option. Council's responses to the termination option as proposed in November indicates there is a high tolerance level for non-performance of services because of the need to protect the activity at the theatre and to ensure the theatre is a feature of the economic recovery of the town centre. With the level of tolerance established, council officers can continue to monitor the situation and make further assessments and recommendations to members. Those further assessments can weigh up the tolerance threshold against the termination threshold. Over the next 3 months, we'll learn a lot more about the vaccine rollout. We'll learn a lot more about the new strains, and we'll also learn the outcome of this Cultural Recovery Fund bid. So in 3 months' time, we'll have a lot more information that we can factor into this decision-making process. So for those reasons outlined and as explained, the recommended option is option 1, with the recommendations being in the report, which I could read if you'd like me to, Chair, or I could... probably it's been spoken for quite long enough already, so I'll won't read the recommendations. I'll be quiet and ask for questions.
Chairman, you're on mute.
We still can't hear you, Paul.
Chairman, you're on mute.
Paul, switch on.
Unmute him, Olivia.
Someone unmute him.
The chairman has been unmuted.
Oh, right, okay, sorry. I've almost lost my train of thought there. I just wanted to check if we got Mr. Nicholson onto the call. I don't know if Mr. Nicholson...
I'm on the phone.
Oh, okay, thank you. Right, if you would like to make your presentation to the committee now, please, sir.
Thank you very much indeed. Good evening, everyone. My name is Keith Nicholson, Maidstone resident and member of the Hazlitt Community Choir and friend of the Hazlitt. Friends of the Hazlitt is a small group of choir members who have been active in the campaign to persuade you to reopen the Hazlitt Theatre just as soon as COVID rules allow. And my statement this evening also has the support of all 11 other Hazlitt user group members. As you might imagine, we were delighted to read your officer's recommendation not to mothball the Hazlitt and to continue to work with Parkwood in the coming months. We do, of course, recognise the severe impact COVID is having on council budgets, and as ratepayers we not only understand but support the council's intention to keep Hazlitt finances under review. However, it's our view that the recommendation can be improved. The Hazlitt enriches the lives and enhances the well-being of thousands of townspeople. It generates more than £5 million worth of trade to the town centre, and there can have been no better demonstration of this than the public's response to your last debate on the future of the Hazlitt Theatre back in November. So many people clearly have an interest in its future. This interest should be acknowledged in your resolution tonight. We urge you, therefore, to agree some additional words along the following lines. That any further report must incorporate the views of Hazlitt users, audiences, town centre businesses, and the wider general public on the management options being considered. Thank you for your attention.
Oh, sorry, thank you, Mr. Nicholson. That was nice, short and to the point. So thank you very much for attending. I think if you could log off now and follow the meeting on the webcast. I think that's normal procedure, isn't it, Olivia?
Yes, Chairman.
Yeah.
Of course. Thank you.
Thank you very much again, sir. Before I take this any further, I just wanted to, and I'll come to visiting members in a minute. I just wanted to ask, and I don't want to, I'm not preempting anything, okay? And I just wanted to check, because obviously we've got some of the paper on white agenda, which we can discuss now. And clearly we've got the exempt annex on the yellow papers. Now, you know, obviously, you know, we can move into private session at the relevant time to discuss the items on the yellow papers. That would obviously preempt moving into yellow. We wouldn't be able to make a decision on the recommendations in public because we would obviously need to consider those points. So I just wanted to check from members whether they felt that we could have a discussion on the Hazlitt Arts Centre and the way forward in public session without having to go into private session. I'm clearly obviously in everybody's hands from the committee this evening on that.
I just feel we should just all sort of behave ourselves and steer away from the sort of the some of the detail that's in those papers and stick to the sort of the key principles in the open report and do our best to keep the debate in the open.
No, that's my preference. We did, everybody remembers that the full council a couple of meetings ago when there was a call-in request and we had yellow papers, we managed to have that whole debate on the open session without referring in too much detail to the yellow. So if everybody's happy to do that, I would suggest we try to do that this evening, and that way at least the public will have the opportunity to hear the whole debate, unless, as I say, anyone does request us at some point to go into private session.
I agree with Councillor Pearl. Chairman. I think it's very important. The yellow paper's very interesting and good backup and all the rest of it. But if we can keep this in the public section, I'll be really satisfied.
So will I. That'll be okay. So I'll now go over to visiting members. And I think Councillor Sue Grigg, you wanted to make a short comment.
Thank you, Chair. Having been heavily involved with the Hazlitt Theatre Users Committee and the Kent Drama Association over the years, probably more years than I care to remember, going back to the 70s, I am very interested to hear the discussions this evening between members, and I'm particularly interested around the inclusion of community involvement. So I just thought I would explain why I was interested and needed to be here this evening. Thank you.
No, that's fine. So can I just check if any of the other visiting members who are still here, I think we've got Councillor John Perry and Councillor David Nagy would like to say a few words at this point.
I would like to, if that's possible.
Yeah, no, of course. Go on, John.
Thanks, Paul. Yeah, I'm going to state the obvious, but I'm going to say it at any rate. Maidstone is the county town of Kent, and I think it should always have a theatre. It's very important, and the Hazlitt has played a very important part in the cultural life of the borough and in the economic life as well. It generates a lot of business for the town. So basically what I want to see is a commitment from this committee to ensure that the retention of the Hazlitt as an operating theatre. I think that is incredibly important, and clearly it will return to operation once the COVID crisis has been sorted out and resolved. And I do think the officer's report on the vaccinations was a tiny bit negative, if I may comment on that, because I think there's a lot more positivity to come out of the system than that. So I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you, John. Now, David Nagy, I don't know if you'd like to...
Yes, sir. I thought I'd let John go first, seniority.
Oh, blimey, you're the mayor.
Obviously, the Hazlitt is the community, part of the community. It is the community. I've had many years of connection with the Hazlitt, funny enough. You wouldn't think so, but I have, funny enough. And I'd like to see all user groups who haven't ceased using it for a while, whatever, all have the opportunity of coming back in some way. And I'm hoping that whatever the deal is struck with the existing people is that all user groups who have not used it for years have the opportunity to come back. And all user groups in Maidstone have the opportunity, not just the current ones, but there's more out there than what use it at the moment. So I'm very keen for all user groups in Maidstone have the opportunity to perform at the Hazlitt in one way or another. And it's just a fantastic opportunity for local young kids to make a start on their career in that sort of industry. And the Hazlitt, it's not the biggest place, but that's where lots of people start in the beginning and get recognised. And I think because Maidstone are always going to get it back open in some way. It's just a case of COVID came along, and of course we're paying a lot of money out, and it's not being used. As the speaker spoke earlier, was saying, obviously we're all taxpayers of Maidstone. So hopefully this deal will be a fantastic deal, whatever that deal is. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, David. As chair of the committee, I'm now formally moving the two recommendations on the agenda papers. So I'll read those out for members of the public and for the committee. So one, that the council continues to pay its agreed contract fee to Parkwood Leisure for the provision of services at the Hazlitt Arts Centre. And secondly, that officers continue to monitor Parkwood Leisure's performance with respect to the delivery of the requirements of the Hazlitt Arts Centre services contract as defined by the key performance indicators, and make a further recommendation in April 2021. So can I see a seconder for that before I go on to make a few comments? Anybody like to second that?
I'll second it, Mark. Paul.
Second it. I've said enough.
Okay. Yes, I think we're at an important point tonight, and I fully endorse the comments everyone has said so far. And I think hopefully people got a feel from my answer to the written question earlier. As everyone on the committee knows, I'm really passionate about arts and culture, which is hence I've been hammering on the earlier reports this evening. The Hazlitt Arts Centre is what it says. It's an arts centre. It's a mixture. We've got the Hazlitt Theatre, we've got the Exchange Studio, and we've got an art gallery and rehearsal space. So it covers the full ambit of what you'd expect from an arts centre. And I think a town of our size needs a vibrant arts centre at its heart, and the Hazlitt has provided that for decades, I think, probably for generations, as I'm sure some of the councillors who've been around longer than I have here tonight would vouch from personal experience. So it's really important. And as I said earlier, in terms of the strategic plan, I view it as a key part of our arts and cultural transformation plans we want to do going ahead. And in doing that, I recognise Parkwood as our service provider and our partner at the Hazlitt Arts Centre. They were awarded a contract before I was on the council back in 2013 or 2012, and all the way through from 2013 when it started up until 2019, or and probably at the very first month or two of 2020 before the pandemic, I think there were no significant concerns, and the contract was working well. The partnership between Maidstone Council and Parkwood was one where we were both obtaining what we wanted in terms of having a vibrant arts centre, as I say, at the heart of our cultural life and community. Then obviously we've had COVID, as we all know what's gone on the last year, and clearly we made that review and those back in November. But I think, as I agree with John, the world has now changed. Luckily, the vaccination programme seems to be going according to plan, and I'm sure, like everybody here and across the UK, we hope it to completely go successfully, and that by the summer, a significant parts of the population will have had some protection, and I would like to see parts, if not all, of the Hazlitt Arts Centre being able to be reopened. And I look forward to working with Parkwood at Proms in the Park, where they assist us, and we work in partnership there. And I'd also hope to work with Parkwood to put on other outdoor events in the interim before perhaps all of the facilities within the building can be brought back into use. There's reference to a couple of points in the report on paragraph 3.5, which were 2 points I actually asked to be considered by Parkwood in terms of how we could move on, and they've accepted them both. And I'll just briefly say my reason for submitting them to them. The Hazlitt Arts Centre Advisory Group I've recommended, I've done some work on, and we'll do more work with Parkwood on, assuming we agree recommendations tonight. The idea behind that is just to bring the wider community in terms of our arts and cultural life into a dialogue with Parkwood, which will hopefully enrich both Parkwood in its offer and our cultural and artistic community as a two-way process to actually help enrich the activities at the Arts Centre. And the other item I suggested, which they've accepted as well, was the business plan. And we've heard a lot about their business plan over the last few weeks. In future, they're quite happy to present that to members of the committee. They were saying, because I had a meeting actually with Parkwood Leisure, with the officers on the 8th of January, where this came up, and they said that they're more than happy to work directly with members of committees or cabinet, depending on the authority, to actually get that element of democratic engagement and synergy. And so that's why they're happy to be bringing their business plan to us in discussion in future, so that we, if you like, can review with them the year just gone, but also look forward to the year coming and have a discussion with them about some of the plans they had for the forthcoming year. So those two things I thought were really positive, and I'm pleased that they've adopted them both. Following on from tonight, as I say, if we agree the decisions, I'm planning to, with Martin Round as Vice Chair, the two of us, we're planning to have a meeting with Parkwood once, if you like, the dust has settled in probably early February, only next week, isn't it? To help reboot the relationship, because I can understand both from, Maidstone Council as well as Parkwood. Clearly, it's been a difficult few months, going back to October, November, December into January. lots of discussions clearly, and they've all been primarily around financial. We've had the report tonight, so we can imagine they've not been the easiest of discussions. So what I'm keen to do with Martin is, and working, as I say, with our colleagues both at Parkwood and at Maidstone Council, is to reboot the relationship, lift it up from talking about facts and figures to actually talking about arts and culture, because at the end of the day it's an arts centre. It's getting that vibrancy and creativity coming through in the discussions, which I really want to see us engender, and as I say, go forward working in tandem with Parkwood to build a new relationship where we can see that arts centre, you know, thrive better than it has done, and ideally even move up a peg in terms of creativity. Yeah, so I feel really enthusiastic that there's a lot of work for us to do, working jointly with Parkwood. And at that point, I'll shut up, because what I want to do is to get the decision so I can get on with the work. so thank you, Jonathan, for moving it. Over to Martin. I know you want to move an amendment. So Martin.
Yeah, thank you. In the context of the first two recommendations, I would like to ask that a third recommendation is offered, basically to ensure and let people know, particularly as per Mr Nicholson's request, and also as mentioned by Councillor Grigg and Councillor Nagy, that we need to send out a message, and that recommendation would include words based on that officers prioritise the continuity and capability of the Hazlitt operation and work to ensure, whilst working with all key partners, that the Hazlitt returns to life as and when COVID allows it to do so. If that could be a third recommendation, then that can enforce everything that we're believing in, saying and wanting and desiring, and it allows some flexibility in whatever may change.
Thank you for that, Martin. As the mover of the motion, I'm happy to accept that as an amendment to the proposal.
As am I as the seconder.
Yeah, thank you for that, Jonathan. So there's now 3 recommendations we're presenting to the committee for debate this evening. At the moment, I've got Bob Hinder first to speak, and then I've got Jonathan. So, Bob, over to you.
Thank you, Chair. I'll keep it very brief because you've stolen most of my thunder. I would like it sort of put on record that back in November, when we had that first meeting, none of us dreamt that we would now be in a situation of 6 million plus people being vaccinated. That has seriously changed the situation, and that is why I fully support the recommendations that have been put forward, and would love to see the Hazlitt maintained and developed for our people. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob. Jonathan.
It's 2 points, Mr. Chairman. The first being a question for Mr. Evans, and I know that to some degree Martin's already covered this, but Mr. Nicholson made an important point about any future report taking into account the views of users, businesses, and other stakeholders. Could I assume, Mr. Evans, that that's not contentious, and and that any report will indeed include that? And then, if I may come back on my second point after the answer.
Yeah, Mike.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Pearl. Yes, of course we can endeavour to talk to the public and include those views. We may need to work out the best way of doing it. Sometimes the timescales can be quite tight for writing the reports, and also making sure that we give everyone enough time to be involved in that process. But yeah, I've no reason to doubt that that's not beyond us. Yeah.
And if
actually, Jonathan, can I just add a comment to that? Because I think it's a very valid point. The reason I didn't address it earlier is because I'm hoping we don't get to a situation where, if you like, depending obviously where we are with the epidemic in April, I'm hoping that we'll agree to continue with this new relationship with Parkwood, so we actually don't get to a situation of actually having to look, if you like, at alternatives. I'm hoping that we can work with Parkwood for the remainder of the contract.
And my second point, if I may, is I'd just like to say how grateful I am for the additional work that's been undertaken so far in respect to the Hazlitt, and that's whether it's Mr. Evans, the work by Mr. Evans, Mr. Foster, or indeed or the Chief Executive, or indeed Chairman by yourself. And on that regard, I just sort of want to thank you for your sort of positive comments tonight.
I'm sure we'd all like to thank you for those thoughts, Jonathan. I think a lot of work, I know, with the officers has been done. I mean, they've worked their socks off, and so I'm sure everyone would appreciate that. Can I ask if any other councillor at the moment would like to speak at all?
Chairman,
who's that?
Sorry. Just to come in and say I think everything's been said very well tonight, and just to say, we all support it. I'm a Maidstone girl, born and bred, and Hazlitt's been there for myself and my children. But just to reiterate what's been said, I've not heard any member at Maidstone Borough Council that have wanted to even think about closing the Hazlitt. And I'm absolutely sure that everyone is going to be behind doing everything they can to work together in partnership to just get it open again. That's what we want to do. So thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Denise. As nobody else has indicated, and I think we're all supporting and on the same wavelength on this. And I'm just trying to think, because I assume that, does anybody actually want to have a named vote, or can we all just agree the recommendations unanimously?
I think just agree.
Yeah, okay. Well, look, I agree, Jill. Okay, so look, I think we can take it as we've agreed that unanimously.
Agreed.
So I'd like, yeah.
All three recommendations?
Agreed.
Everything
Yes.
with knobs on.
Yeah.
Yes, so right, that's it. So we've agreed the recommendations. And as I say, the next stage, obviously, we'll be contacting Parkwood, and I will be contacting the main negotiators over at Parkwood with Martin to arrange a meeting, as I said earlier, to try to help, reset our relationship in a positive way to go forward. So thanks everybody for that. And I know the Hazlitt hasn't been an easy topic for us over the last few months, but I think tonight we've reached a good way forward to, as I say, to reboot our relationship positively. So on that point, that's the end of our agenda. We don't need to go into part two. So I'd just like to thank everybody from the committee here tonight, and as I say, really thank the officers for the work they've done on the Hazlitt and the other work we've got tonight. And I'd like to thank the public who've been listening patiently at home as well for listening. And so I'd just like to formally end the meeting at that point. So I declare the meeting closed.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, everyone. Love you all.
Yeah.
Well done.
Good night, Paul. Thank you.
Yeah. Good night.
Well done, Paul.
Thank you, Jonathan.
Good night.